It was my son's birthday. I was in the kitchen before sunrise, preparing his favorite dish since he was little, chicken noodle soup. I took my time, making it with love and care to achieve that perfect, comforting flavor. After an hour and a half on the commuter train, clutching my bags, I finally arrived at my son's house in the suburbs. But as the front door cracked open, a cold voice cut through the air. It was my daughter-in-law, Susan. "Evelyn, you don't need to come here anymore. You're not needed here." Behind her, my son, Michael, just stood there silently, avoiding my gaze. Seeing him say nothing, I understood everything. Oh, today is going to be his last birthday. The last day I can do anything for him as his mother. With a quiet smile, I placed the thermos I had brought on the porch and turned to leave. I resolved never to look back. My name is Margaret Johnson. I am 75 years old and live quietly alone in a small house in the suburbs of Chicago. My husband, Robert, died suddenly 15 years ago in a car accident. He was on his way to work when a driver ran a red light. The police said he had just chosen a different route than usual that day. From that day on, I felt like I lost half of my life. His laughter, the sound of his footsteps, the way he said, "See you later," every morning as he left for work, everything suddenly vanished from this world. But I couldn't just wallow in grief, because I had the one treasure Robert had left behind, my son, Michael. He was my pride and joy. He was diligent in his studies, kind to others, and had been saying since elementary school that he wanted to become a doctor. Robert and I were never wealthy, but we were determined to do anything for our child's dreams. That thought alone sustained me through the daily grind. I delivered newspapers in the morning, worked at a sandwich shop during the day, and cleaned offices at night. The days were long, but I wasn't discouraged. Every time I saw my son's back as he went to school with his backpack, I thought, I can do this. Then, one spring day when Michael was a senior in high school, he was accepted into the prestigious pre-med program at Northwestern University. On the day the acceptance letters were posted, he turned to me in front of the bulletin board, tears in his eyes, and said, "Mom, thank you. Someday I'm going to build a big house and we'll live together. I want you to be able to relax." Those words were the greatest reward of my life. All 15 years of hard work felt worth it. I cried openly on the train home that day, unable to hold back my tears. I was happy, proud, and I couldn't help being a little afraid. I felt like he might go far away. The premonition crossed my mind. Afterwards, he became a successful doctor, and soon after starting his career, he got married. His wife, Susan, was a nurse who worked at the same hospital. She was bright, polite, and I liked her immediately. At the wedding, Michael took my hand again and said, "Mom, I hope you'll be part of this too. We're a family now." In my heart, I quietly told my late husband, "Robert, are you watching? He's grown into such a fine man." That day, I truly believed I had been welcomed as part of their family. But after that, something slowly began to go wrong. It started with small things. "I'm too busy at work, so I can't see you this week." Something came up, maybe later. "You don't need to send presents. Don't worry about it." I tried to take it as consideration. He must be truly busy. He wasn't used to being married yet. I tried to find reasons and convince myself it was okay. But before I knew it, season after season passed, and we barely saw each other. One year on his birthday, I gathered my courage and called him. From the other end of the line, I heard a voice that sounded apologetic. "Oh, Mom, I can't today. Susan's got the flu, I'll call you later." Later never came. That day, I sat alone in front of a small cake I had made, watching TV in silence. I didn't even light the candles. I just flipped through old photo albums one by one. Some showed him as a child, holding my finger with his little hand. There were pictures of him winning first place at a school sports day, the day he wore his white doctor's coat for the first time, and photos of him as a little boy, asleep with his head on my shoulder. None of them explained our current distance. I didn't understand why we had grown so far apart. The big house he had promised me was built a few years ago, a brand new 5-bedroom house, a large living room, children's rooms, a study, a den, and bedrooms. But there wasn't a mother's room in that house. The first time I visited the house, I brought a small bouquet of flowers. When I rang the doorbell, his wife came to the door and gave me a vague smile, saying, "Oh, hi." I was led to the living room, and I noticed that nowhere in the room were there photos of me or gifts from me. I remember feeling a coldness deep in my chest at that moment. I realized that I was just a visitor. On the train home that day, I stared at my reflection in the window. I looked old, I thought, but I had a feeling it wasn't just because of my age. My name is Margaret Johnson. I was a mother who believed in her son's future and gave him everything. And now, in the house my son had built, there was no place for me. Even so, I continued to smile every day. I didn't regret the days I spent wishing for his happiness, or so I tried to tell myself. But if I could speak my true feelings just once, I just want him to remember. Remember the promise he made that day to live together someday. Because that was the last hope of my life. My name is Margaret Johnson. It has been 5 years since my son got married. Time flies, and before I knew it, a grandchild was born, and I was truly happy for this new family. At first, whenever I was invited, I would visit right away, bringing homemade casseroles and apple pie. Seeing my grandchild's face was my greatest joy, but at some point, when I rang the doorbell, the voice I heard from behind the door began to sound just a little cold. Things are hectic today. Sorry, I just have time for coffee. I'm starting dinner, so. Each time I heard such things, I'd just smile and reply, "Oh, that's all right, dear, no problem at all." I was raised to believe that holding back, being considerate, was just good manners, the polite thing to do as an adult. Still, whenever I saw the gifts I brought, sitting untouched in a corner of the kitchen until nightfall, I couldn't help but feel a slight unease deep inside. One day, I decided to bring a small bouquet of flowers. It was a few days before Michael's birthday, and I wanted to say, "Happy birthday" a bit early. I was shown into the living room, and while Susan was off trying to find a vase, I glanced at an album sitting on the shelf. It had "Family Memories" written on the big white cover. I remembered how much Michael loved taking pictures when he was little, and a wave of nostalgia washed over me. I gently opened the album. Inside were pictures from their wedding, their honeymoon, life in their new home, the kids growing up, page after page filled with smiling faces, the family looking so happy. But then, no matter which page I turned, no matter which photo I looked at, there wasn't a single picture of me in there. Or rather, it wasn't that I wasn't there, but more that I had been removed. That's how it felt. There was the group photo from field day, the family picture taken on granddaughter's first communion. I remembered clearly being there, but that part of me had been carefully erased. It was as if I had never existed in the first place. In that instant, my heart clenched, my fingertips went cold, and my hand trembled as I closed the album. I didn't say anything. I put the flowers in a vase, placed it on the table, and quietly said, "Well, I should be getting home now." On the way back, as I turned the corner by the grocery store, an old neighbor suddenly called out to me, "Oh, Margaret, long time no see. I saw your son and his family at the train station the other day. The kids have grown so much." I smiled and said, "Yes, they have." But then, the words she casually spoke next hit me like a ton of bricks. "But you weren't with them, so I just assumed you weren't living with them." Someone even joked, "Maybe her mom passed away, just kidding around." I couldn't force a laugh in response. Even though I knew it was a joke, the reality of being spoken of as if I were no longer there felt incredibly heavy. I went home and sat on the sofa for the longest time. The ticking of the clock was the only sound in the room. Maybe I'm not needed anymore. The thought flitted through my mind. But I quickly scolded myself, saying, "No, family ties can't just disappear. Blood is thicker than water, right?" That's what I believed. Perhaps believing it was the only way I could keep myself together. After that, I still made sure to send gifts for birthdays. I never missed sending holiday cards, and I always called during special occasions. But my calls were never returned, and eventually, the letters stopped coming too. Someone once gently suggested, "Why don't you just give it a rest?" But I'd just laugh it off, saying, "I'm a mom, it's the least I can do." Then came last year's New Year's Eve. I finally decided to visit them for New Year's Day. The gift I prepared was a selection of homemade holiday dishes, along with New Year's money for the grandkids, and Michael's favorite, sweet potato casserole. I rang the doorbell, and I heard hurried footsteps from inside. It was Susan who answered the door. She looked a little surprised to see me. Oh, hi, Margaret. I'm sorry, we're just about to head out. Hearing that, I didn't even step inside. I just handed her the heavy paper bag. This is the New Year's dishes and a little something for the grandkids. I didn't want to be a bother. She gave me a vague smile and said, "Thank you, well, bye," before closing the door. I stood in front of that door for a moment, and then quietly walked away. On the way home, I glanced up at the sky, and I could hear the distant sounds of New Year's fireworks. I quietly whispered to myself as I walked. I thought I was part of the family. My name is Margaret Johnson. I'm a mother who once believed in her son more than anything. But now, I'm starting to realize that that belief is slowly turning into a knife that cuts me. My name is Margaret Johnson. It was my son's 35th birthday. I woke up at 5 in the morning and went to the kitchen. I carefully measured the rice, boiled the chicken, chopped the ginger and green onions, and slowly made the broth. As it simmered, I imagined my son's smiling face from when he was a little boy. "Mom, you made chicken soup for me again today? Yay!" He would hold his chopsticks with his tiny hands and ask for seconds and thirds. We weren't well off back then, so we rarely had fancy meals, but this chicken soup was a birthday tradition. That's why I wanted to bring back that warmth that remained in his memory just for today. With that in mind, I carefully put it all together. When I opened the lid, a waft of steam and the aroma of chicken rose up, and I quietly nodded. Okay. I looked at the clock, and it was already past 4 in the afternoon. I drew a bath, soaked in the warm water, and then took out the navy blue formal dress I had made for my wedding from the back of the closet. How many years has it been since I last wore this dress? The hand that tightened the belt was trembling a little, and it wasn't just because of my age, I don't think. I smiled faintly in front of the mirror and told myself, you got this. And then, I gently took out the silver wristwatch with the thin leather strap from the wooden box. I had saved up 3 months of my pension to finally get it. It was nothing fancy, but it had a quiet second hand, was easy to read, and had a simple, elegant design. It'll look good on his wrist, that's what I thought when I picked it out. I wrapped the soup in a thermal bag, put the present in a gift bag, and left the house. After changing trains, I arrived at my son's house at exactly 6 in the evening. As the sunset sky began to turn purple, I stood in front of the entrance, took a deep breath, and rang the doorbell. When? Ding dong. A few seconds of silence. During that time, I felt my heart beating faster. Then, the door opened. Standing there was my son's wife, Susan. Not greeting me with her usual smile, but wearing an expression of surprise, she stared at me for a few seconds without saying a word. I spoke cheerfully. "Good evening. Isn't it your birthday today, Michael? I brought some chicken noodle soup, remember? The kind you loved when you were little." As I said this, I lifted the cloth-wrapped bundle slightly, but the words that came from her mouth pierced my heart sharply. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. We want to spend today quietly, just the two of us, so your mother-in-law isn't needed." Needed. Those 2 words echoed so coldly and heavily. Thinking my ears had deceived me, I looked at her face again. But she didn't avert her eyes and said it clearly. I simply muttered, "I see," and started to leave. At that moment, I happened to glance into the depths of the entryway. I saw my son in the living room, sitting on the sofa. Holding a smartphone in his hand, the look on his face as he stared at something didn't even suggest he noticed my presence. "Oh, Michael." Just as I was about to call out his name, he finally looked up. Our eyes met. In that instant, I thought, he silently averted his gaze with a blank expression. With that single movement of his eyes, I understood everything. Gently hugging the insulated bag containing the chicken noodle soup closer to my chest, I smiled just at the corners of my mouth and bowed my head slightly. "I understand. I'm sorry for intruding." Turning my back, no voice called out to me. On the way home, I happened to pass by the hospital where Michael was born. In the past, I walked this road many times, pushing a stroller. I remembered the nights I stayed up taking care of him when he had a cold or a fever, making him chicken noodle soup. And now, the reality of being told, "You aren't needed." Strangely, no tears came, only the warmth spreading through my palms. The fact that it was the temperature of the still warm chicken noodle soup was the only thing proving my today. My name is Margaret Johnson. I was once a mother who lived for my son's smile. I will surely never forget the day my son told me, "You aren't needed." Oh. Even so, I still can't stop being a mother. On the way home, I deliberately walked one stop further for my train transfer. The winter twilight came early, and the orange streetlights were beginning to light up the streets. Under that light, my shadow fell on the sidewalk, thin and long. "Has my back gotten this bent?" I muttered to my shadow as if talking to myself. Even that voice was lost in the silence, unheard by anyone, and only the sound of my shoes echoed softly. When I got home, the house was the same as it had been during the day. Nothing had changed. On the table were the chicken noodle soup, still in the insulated bag, and a small box containing the wristwatch. I gently placed them on the kitchen table, retied my apron, and turned on the stove again. Since I made it, it would be a waste not to eat it, right? I said to myself, reheating the chicken noodle soup. I ladled it into a bowl, added a little parsley, and set out chopsticks. A one-person birthday celebration was prepared in silence. Taking a spoonful and putting it in my mouth, a nostalgic taste spread across my tongue. The taste that Michael repeatedly called delicious when he was little. But now, there was no one in front of me, and there was no voice to answer my question. How is it? Is it good? That night, I took out a sheet of stationery and tried to write something. But the hand holding the pen stopped. If the person I want to tell isn't trying to listen anymore, is there any point in writing? At that moment, I folded the stationery and put it back in the drawer. Then, I sat in the family altar room and clasped my hands in front of my late husband's portrait. What would you have done in a situation like this? While asking that question, I stared at my husband's smiling face in the photo. When he was around, even if something painful happened, just talking about it over a cup of tea at night would calm my heart. But now, for me, who no longer even had that listener, today was just too long and too heavy. Before going to bed, I quietly turned over just one thing: the photo frame. It was the last family photo taken with my son and me. It was no longer a memory for me, but something that was about to turn into a phantom. Getting into bed and closing my eyes, the words spoken at the front door echoed repeatedly in my mind. "Your mother-in-law isn't needed." I learned firsthand that night how much the feeling of not being needed could sink a person's heart. But at the same time, I also thought this: am I going to disappear without saying anything, like this? Or should I have the courage to end something for myself? The answer to that question will surely not come immediately. But in that moment, standing frozen in front of that door, something inside me had definitely collapsed with a sound. My name is Margaret Johnson. From that night on, I quietly began to consider the next step. My name is Margaret Johnson. I will probably never forget that day until I die. The night of his birthday, holding homemade chicken noodle soup, carefully wrapping the wristwatch as a present, and standing in front of my son's house in a dress I hadn't worn in a long time. I was speechless at the words, "You aren't needed," spoken at the door, and I tried to maintain a smile somehow. But it didn't end there. Over her shoulder, I found Michael's figure, deep in the living room. The side profile of a man sitting deep in the white sofa and fiddling with his smartphone. Without saying anything, I immediately knew it was my son. The shoulders I had hugged for so many years, the part in his hair that I had put to sleep so many times, and the knees crossed as if protecting a child. There was no doubt, it was my son. Without thinking, I gripped the edge of the cloth wrapper tighter. Somewhere in my heart, I had a slight hope that he would notice me, get up, and come to the entrance. However, he didn't even try to look up from his smartphone. I called his name again in a small voice. I didn't intend to say it out loud, but it may have been a trembling call that seemed to leak from the back of my throat. Then, he finally looked up. Our eyes met. For just a moment, our gazes locked. In that instant, I thought to myself, he got it. Oh, he noticed me. But, in the next moment, he said nothing, simply looked away silently, and picked up the TV remote that was lying on the armrest of the sofa. His eyes hadn't seen me, like something that passed by, without a sound, as if erasing it from the spot. It was there for the first time that I distinctly heard the sound of something breaking in my heart, a shattering sound. It was like glass, but quieter, yet sharp, cutting deep into the depths of my chest. The word family, that I had always cherished within me, shattered into pieces in that instant. I didn't say anything more, took just one step back, and bowed my head slightly. And, as I listened to the sound of the front door closing quietly behind me, I slowly left that place. The night wind swayed the hem of my dress, and the cold asphalt seeped into the soles of my feet through my sandals. On the way home, I happened to pass by a 7-Eleven. There was a large banner displayed in front of the store. Order your birthday cake now. Happy birthday with the whole family. The moment I saw those words, unexpectedly tears streamed down my cheeks. The cake I saw in the depths of that living room. A lavish decoration with plenty of strawberries on top of white whipped cream. In the center, there was a chocolate plaque. Happy birthday with the whole family. With the whole family. That phrase, ironically, seemed to completely negate my existence. Family is complete without me. The family I once raised had unknowingly transformed into a different shape that didn't need me. That was the reality. While swaying on the subway, I sat embracing the cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside were the still warm chicken noodle soup and the wristwatch I couldn't give, things I had prepared for my son's birthday. But both had become unnecessary items. Arriving at the station, I returned home, carefully folded my dress, opened the cloth-wrapped bundle, and placed the cold chicken noodle soup in the kitchen. The wristwatch box still had the ribbon on it. Without untying it, I gently put it away in the drawer. Then, I headed to the prayer room and placed my hands together in front of the portrait of my late husband. I'm sorry. I couldn't keep my promise to you. I guess I'm no longer part of our son's family. My voice trembled, and the depths of my chest grew hot. But that heat didn't turn into tears. It just remained quietly deep within my chest. My name is Margaret Johnson. 35 years ago, I raised a life with these hands. And I am a mother who has come this far believing only in love. But that day, I learned, Yug's Aldeld doesn't always reach people's hearts. After placing my hands together in the prayer room, I couldn't move from that spot for a while. The winter night was quiet, and only the sound of the old grandfather clock hanging on the wall of the room. Tick-tock, ticked regularly. With the whole family, huh? I repeated the words written on that cake over and over in my head. A family without me. A happy gathering I don't know about. I finally had to acknowledge from the bottom of my heart that that was the current reality. I opened the drawer of the chest and took out an old photo album. The day my son was born, the day he smiled for the first time, his first day of school with his backpack, sports day, exams, graduation, and then his figure wearing a white coat. Each of those was my life itself. In the photos, I was always smiling. Without showing any signs of fatigue, I was proudly looking at the person holding the camera. But that smile now looks a little painful. Where did I go wrong? When I said it out loud, it had an empty echo, as if questioning the wall. That night, I had a dream for the first time in a while. In the dream, my young son spread his arms and said, "Mom, hold me." I smiled and picked up his small body, rubbed my cheek against his, and told him, "I love you." But from the arms that picked him up, he gradually moved away, and in front of my eyes, he turned into an adult. And he said this, "I don't need you anymore, Mom." In the dream, I tried to ask, why? But the words didn't come out. As it was, I woke up, and there was still a warm hot water bottle by my pillow, and a handkerchief that had fallen onto the tatami mat. The faint light of the morning sun shone through the shoji screen, and the air was clear and pure. I quietly got up and picked up the wristwatch box that was left on the table. I hesitated to open that box, but I left it as it was and returned it to the back of the drawer. This may no longer be for my son. That's what I thought. Yeah. At this moment, a distinct seed of determination was born within me. My name is Margaret Johnson. I am a mother who, after spending a long time loving and supporting someone, was finally told that I was unnecessary. That's why, from now on, I must relive myself. That idea was gradually taking root in my heart. My name is Margaret Johnson. From the moment the front door closed quietly that day, I felt that something had begun to change within me. The feeling that I had believed in for a long time. It will surely get through someday. That night, when I was confronted with the reality that it would end without reaching, I decided to stop waiting. Above all, I decided in my heart that I would not choose a way of life that continued to consume myself any further. The next morning, I slowly made tea, sat down at the desk, and spread out a sheet of stationery. The first thing I wrote was the phone number of the law firm. Below that, I wrote only, "Review of will contents," and placed it where I could see it, so I could contact them at any time. At 10 in the morning, I made a phone call. This is Margaret Johnson. Regarding the will that I consulted you about before, I would like to request a change in the contents. The person in charge responded gently, and I made an appointment for a meeting the following week. The moment I put down the receiver, I felt strangely relieved deep in my chest. This is not a punishment. I'm just stopping clinging to a place where I'm no longer wanted. I told myself that. A few days later, I visited the office, and I carried out the procedure to return to blank all the contents that had previously been written to have my son inherit everything. The person in charge asked in surprise, "Has your son agreed to this?" I smiled and replied, "No, he doesn't know anything. It's just that I'm no longer needed. This is my own way of settling things." The procedures went smoothly, and on the way home, I felt strangely calm as I headed to the train station. From there, I went straight to a real estate agency. This house my late husband left me. This space where we lived together for over 40 years. I had decided to let it go. The pillar at the entrance, the worn spots on the tatami mats, the height markings on the kitchen wall, all were precious memories to me. But more than that, I finally realized that the time spent waiting here was gradually wearing me down. The appraisal came back higher than I had expected. It was a quiet residential area, a decent distance from downtown, with good transportation and high demand, they said. Looking at the amount they offered, I simply said, "Thank you," and started the selling process right then and there. Once the closing date was set, I started looking for a new place to live. I chose a small assisted living facility that wasn't too fancy but offered both attentive care and independent living. My room had a small kitchenette and a balcony, a space where I could open the window in the morning, bask in the light, and brew a cup of tea. After signing the contract, one evening before my move-in date, I decided to prepare a final gift for my son. It was a collection of memory photos stored in a cedar box. The day I first held him as a newborn, the portrait of me he drew in kindergarten, his smiling face with his backpack, the photo of him with the lucky charm he clutched on exam day, and that miraculous moment when he stood next to me in his white coat. I wrapped each one in soft parchment paper and carefully placed them in the box. I slipped a small note under the lid of the box. "I'm sorry. I realize I've become a burden to you, but the days I spent raising you were the greatest happiness of my life." That was my answer. Later, I had the box shipped by courier. In the sender's field, I simply wrote my name. No more words are needed. No more tears. I quietly packed my belongings for the move, putting only my familiar blankets and tea set in a small cardboard box. On moving day, I said goodbye to my neighbors and took one last slow look around the house. "Thank you. Thanks to you, I was able to live as a mother," I whispered, locking the front door, dropping the key in the mailbox, and quietly left that house behind. My name is Margaret Johnson. Today, I let go of the house I cherished for 40 years and the future I envisioned for my son. But this isn't the end. This is a new beginning, a step toward reclaiming my own life. As the move-in date to my new home approached, I decided to visit the facility once. I went on a weekday afternoon. The aroma of wood gently filled the building, and the winter sunlight streamed softly through the windows. The female staff member who showed me around had a gentle smile. We have morning exercises at 7 a.m. and an arts and crafts club in the afternoon. But you can prioritize your own pace so you don't have to participate if you don't want to. The moment she said that, I felt something lift in my heart. You don't have to force yourself to fit in. I never imagined there would come a day when those words would feel so comforting. After the tour, I sat down on a sofa in the lobby, and a woman sitting nearby spoke to me. First time? Nervous, aren't you? I smiled slightly and replied, yes, but this is a quiet, nice place. We're all kind of rediscovering our first selves here. The first selves? Those words resonated deeply within me. That night, back at home, I was in the kitchen, boiling dumplings by myself. I remembered when my son was little, he would say, "Mom's dumplings are so chewy and good," so I decided to make them one last time, just for myself. Staring at the steaming pot, I quietly pondered, was I really a good mother? No one can tell me the answer anymore. But if I feel even a little lighter today, then I'm sure I didn't do anything wrong. As I moved the dumplings into ice water and arranged them on a plate, I suddenly said aloud, "Thank you for the meal, me." It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular, but it was a word of appreciation directed to myself, who had certainly walked this life. The next morning, I paused for just a moment before dropping my house keys into the mailbox, but the very next second, I heard a clear voice in my mind. "You've done enough. Let's go." My name is Margaret Johnson. Now, I'm beginning to walk my own life on my own 2 feet. My name is Margaret Johnson. 3 months have passed since I moved into this facility. Every morning, I open the curtains at a set time and enjoy a cup of tea while basking in the sunlight. Some days I go to morning exercises, while other days I just quietly sit on the balcony watching the flowers. At first, I was a little disoriented by this structured life, but now, that quietness is the most calming time for me. The weather's lovely today. You've gotten good at tending to the flowers. The casual conversations I have with the staff and other residents, each one is a part of my new normal. One afternoon, while I was at Arts and Crafts Club, a staff member came into the room with a slightly nervous expression. "Margaret, you have a visitor. It may come as a surprise." At those words, my heart skipped a beat. A visitor? Who could be visiting me? When I was led to the entrance hall, there was an unbelievable sight. A middle-aged man in a suit was standing there, frozen. His face was pale and his hands were trembling. His eyes were filled with tears. It was him, my son, my only son. 3 months ago, he didn't say, "I don't need you," but just turned his back in silence. As soon as he saw me, he rushed over and broke down crying like a child. "Mom, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Seeing him like that, I couldn't say anything, and just quietly sat down in a chair. He knelt down in front of me, repeating in a voice choked with emotion, "I didn't know. I didn't know that you sold the house. Everything happened so suddenly." I nodded slowly. "Yes, it was sudden, but there's nothing left now." He looked up, his expression filled with a mixture of emotions. "The money. What about the money from the sale?" I smiled gently, just as I had that day, and said, "I donated it all. Approximately $180,000 to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. As thanks for being able to live to this age, I wanted to entrust it to the next generation." He was speechless, remaining frozen in place for a moment. Then, after a while, he finally spoke. "Actually, we're going through a tough time financially. My wife's family's company is failing, and because of a co-signing situation." At those words, I felt a cold wind blow deep within my heart. Behind my child's words, there was an unspoken plea, "We need money." But, without being moved by it, I slowly closed my eyes. I see, that's been difficult for you. But, I don't want to be tied down by those things anymore. He wore a look of suffering. Mom, why didn't you say anything? If you had just contacted me. I answered quietly, but clearly. Because, even if I had contacted you, you wouldn't have been listening anyway, would you? He couldn't say anything in reply. That day, he raised his face from deep in the entryway, looked at me, and then averted his gaze. The memory of that moment remains vividly in my mind. I continued. I have always cherished my role as a mother, but it wasn't love seeking a reward. While wishing for your happiness, I simply lived believing in you. But, because I believed in you, that silence was the answer for me. At my words, he could only hang his head. After a few minutes of silence, he took something out of his pocket. It was the box of memory photos that I had sent him. I looked at that box, and I cried. I remember everything. The taste of those days, the voices, the smells. And yet, I pretended to forget everything. His hands were trembling. I took the box in my hands and simply replied, "Thank you for cherishing them." After that, he bowed his head deeply and asked, "Can I come again?" I smiled just a little and answered like this, "Yes, of course. But next time, I hope you'll come not as a son, but as an adult." He nodded silently. Watching his retreating figure, I finally arrived at one answer. My name is Margaret Johnson. Even if I lose everything, what remains in the end is the power to cherish myself. Then that is more valuable than being needed by someone. That is what I now know for certain. My name is Margaret Johnson. Now, I live in this small apartment. Pansies and flower pots that I received as gifts line the sunny balcony, and when I open the window, I can faintly hear the voices of children from afar. This apartment is by no means luxurious, but for me now, it is the first place I've chosen just for myself in my life. In the morning, I boil water and have a bowl of rice porridge with a pickled plum. In the afternoon, I do crafts with others on the same floor or teach them origami. At night, I talk with the staff about today's news, and the day ends quietly. One day, I heard that someone in the facility was celebrating a birthday. I was told that this person had no family and that every year passed without anything special. I silently opened my sewing box. Taking out red and gold cloth, I sewed a small drawstring bag, and inside, I placed a letter that said, "Happy birthday," and one of the bells I used to collect. Seeing that person cry tears of joy, I thought from the bottom of my heart, even if we're not family, people can still care for each other. I may have reached the end, as a mother, but, as a person, I am certainly living a beginning here now. Walking down the hallway of the facility, I was suddenly called out to. "Margaret, could you make those apple dumplings again?" When asked that, I naturally smiled and replied, "Of course. Next time, shall we put in extra brown sugar and cinnamon?" In the past, I was standing in the kitchen for my family, but now, surrounded by people with whom I have no blood ties, I am stirring the pot again. Life is truly a mysterious thing. On the other hand, I occasionally receive letters from my son. At first, it was once a month. Eventually, it became every change of season that a letter would arrive. The contents included updates on his life and his children's growth, and sometimes memories of dishes we used to eat. Every time I read those letters, I would quietly nod, saying, "It's okay now. I no longer expect anything or blame anyone. I am simply watching him as an adult from a distance. That is the last form of a mother that I can manage, so I believe. Now, I am increasingly called Mom within this facility. I receive advice from everyone, listen to small worries, and sometimes laugh together through baking cookies. Even if we're not connected by blood, people can become family in their hearts, can't they?" While holding the hand of someone who said that to me, I nodded slowly. That cold winter day, the loneliness I felt beyond the front door, certainly wounded me deeply. But it was because of that wound that I was able to have the courage to cherish myself. I am no longer living to be acknowledged by someone. I am living for myself. Even if I'm not told, thank you. Even if I don't hear, welcome home. There is a place that needs me here. My name is Margaret Johnson. In my 75 years of life, I have finally been able to find the loving self rather than being loved. There is something I would like to tell everyone. Letting go is by no means a defeat. It is a beginning to loving yourself. When you feel forgotten by your family, when you feel crushed by loneliness that you can't put into words, when someone's casual words threaten to break your heart, please think this: I love myself. And if you who are watching this video are taking the existence of your parents for granted, please stop and think for a moment. Have you become too accustomed to receiving love? Isn't true love appreciating that it's there and expressing gratitude? If you're comfortable, please share your own stories in the comments. The love of someone you've turned away from might now be quietly fading somewhere. I'm no longer on the waiting end. But if you still have time, please open that door right away. There's a chance you can still make things right. Don't let pride or stubbornness keep you from what could be a vital reconnection. Think of what you might lose. Think of the regret. Maybe you should reconsider and make that call. Maybe visit that family member. Because remember, the love of those you turned away from may now be quietly fading.